talk about the keto diet later on.
I'm drinking this keto coffee right now.
Oh yeah, butter in your coffee?
No, I'm not sure. No, there's no butter in it.
No.
But it kind of turns your fat into fuel. And it gives
But only if you're not eating sugar,
Yeah,
like that yogurt.
I know.
Yeah. We'll talk about the physiology of that later on. Because really, I mean, that's important because your physiology is going to affect your mind so much. Yeah, I really, I think I said it before in the class. If I have somebody who comes in with depression or anxiety, one of the first things I ask them is, how are you eating? And usually, especially with depression, it's a low-fat diet. Anxiety, it's usually a lot of junk food, and so they're not getting enough vitamins and minerals. So like if you're magnesium deficient, one of the biggest side effects is anxiety. So if you have terrible anxiety, you should at least try to up the magnesium in your diet. So anyhow, all right, moving right along. We'll talk about that stuff later. Okay, so one study looked at intellectual abilities and sort of divided them into vocabulary, performance, things like that. And they found that of these 5 abilities, only 30 to 40% of 81-year-olds experience significant decline. Okay, so we're sort of moving towards, okay, yes, the IQ drops at 80, but how does it drop? Does it drop in all areas of intellectual functioning? And we found that no, it doesn't. It usually drops in about one area. And then almost all retained at least one of their ability, and almost half retained 4 of the 5 abilities post 80 years old. And let me show you a picture of that. No, don't I have a chart? No, I don't have a chart. Dang it. I usually have a chart about this. I'll show you the chart next time. But yeah, so as you're getting older, even though there is an average decline in IQ, you're not losing all of your abilities of intellectual functioning. The majority of people are going, even into those early years, you're going to maintain a large amount of your intellectual capacity. So we're sort of paranoid about getting old, like everybody's guaranteed to get Alzheimer's, which by the way is rare. And it's just not the truth. And the people who are losing it are the ones who have serious health problems. So if you take out those health problems, you see hardly any decline at all. So it's a myth that just because you're old means that you aren't functioning well. Now, what does predict decline? If you don't want to decline, what is it that does it? Health, obviously. You have poor health, it's going to cause problems. But that is not the only, that is the number one factor, but it's not the only factor. Of poor health is not just diseases, but also the drugs your doctor is giving you to treat the diseases. So, for instance, if you are on a statin drug for cholesterol, which, by the way, cholesterol being an issue is a myth. You're actually much better off having high cholesterol than low cholesterol, especially if you're a female. Then a statin causes all sorts of vitamin and mineral deficiencies, and you may start to lose your cognitive intellectual capacity because you are deficient in something. You know, if you've ever had anemia from iron or B12 deficiency, you know that you are not thinking well. You don't have enough oxygen getting to your brain for your brain to be able to think straight. And then having a boring lifestyle. So the greatest intellectual declines were shown by elderly widows. So you have no husband anymore, and you have low social status. Okay? So think of a poor old woman, living out by herself somewhere that doesn't have a lot of prestige in life. You don't have very many activities. You're not doing much with your life, and then you are unhappy with your life. This is the biggest predictor of intellectual decline. You live alone, and you're not very engaged with life, and you're in trouble. At least get a cat. And that is why you see elderly people living by themselves with a cat, because the need for social stimulation and intellectual stimulation is so important to your health and to your overall functioning that even at least an animal is better than nothing at all. But you need to have interaction with other people. People who maintained or even gained their IQ and their intellectual functioning into elderly age had above average SES, which is socioeconomic status. So your social status in life and then the amount of money you have. Advanced education. So you guys are, right now, you're doing good things for your brain. Intact marriages. It's important. Divorce or being widowed or being single is really bad for your brain. Intellectually capable spouses. Don't marry somebody who's stupid. Why? Why is that important?
Intellectual stimulation with your partner.
Yeah. Conversations. You want to go, you both decide, let's take a college class together. You know, things like that. It's really important. You should never marry somebody who is below your intelligence level. Especially if you're female, by the way. Marrying a man who's below your intelligence level is a big predictor of divorce and dissatisfaction, and the opposite for men. So if you marry somebody who's smarter than you, then you've just increased your chance of divorce. So, women want someone who's smarter, men want someone who's dumber. It sounds bad on the male side, but then that's what we want anyway, so we really can't criticize them for it. Okay, and then physically and mentally active lifestyles. So basically you have to keep living life even though you're older. If you get disengaged, if you stop interacting with people, stop doing things, God bless you, then you are guaranteed you're going to lose your IQ. Your intelligence will start to decline, your health will start to decline. One of the biggest predictors of being healthy into old age is having friends, maintaining friendships and family relationships. All right. So hang out with your friends. This is, of course, one of the reasons why the Finnish encourage children to have time to socialize, because it is one of the biggest predictors of maintaining your intelligence, as well as your health. Now, wisdom is another interesting area of intellectual capacity. Wisdom is not considered the same as intelligence. You can be smart, but not necessarily wise, like this wise specimen of motherhood walking into my classroom. Hello.
Do you have a camera battery you were supposed to have given me?
Oh, I didn't know I was supposed to give it to you, but I do have it.
There you go.
There you go.
There you go.
You're welcome. That's my mommy.
She has your mom.
Yes. Yeah, you're in her class, right? Good. Oh, and she mean?
You look like her.
Do I look like her?
Yeah, you do.
I didn't see it at first. I was like, wait, I think I have Dr. Hardy. Wait, this is Dr. Hardy.
Oh, connection. A neuron just connected. Yeah. All right. So wisdom interestingly, it's not predicted by age. So we often think that the elderly are more wise, but that's not necessarily the case. Life experience is the cause, the creator of wisdom. So this is not about your genetics or about your intelligence. It's simply about the amount of life experience you've had. So if you want your children to grow up wise, let them go climb that tree. Because life experience creates wisdom. This is why we have irresponsible children who make dumb life choices, because we did not allow them to experience life and to develop that wisdom. It seems to be a combination of intelligence, personality, and cognitive style, or just the way you think about things. For example, some people may be like highly energetic, very like sort of off the cuff, just do things on the spur of the moment people, and that may contribute to less of a development of wisdom. Whereas you may have a child who suffers from an illness where they can't really go out and do a lot of things. They have to take their time, and maybe they become people watchers. That's sort of, if you can't get out of bed, then where do you get your entertainment from? Maybe by watching and understanding people. Anybody love to people watch? That's me. Like, I love people watching.
Making up stories about them.
Making up stories about them, yeah. So things like that are going to develop your wisdom and helping you to understand people. So if you can slow down and understand life experiences. And some people that comes easy to. And some people, they're just like, no, that's boring, let's just go and do something. Which is, there's nothing wrong with that, God bless you. But it just may take longer for wisdom to develop and may not develop at all. And then a supportive social environment in early adulthood. That's interesting because we usually think everything is about childhood. But it's actually early adulthood that contributes to the development of wisdom into the later years. Interesting, huh? Okay. So moms and dads, don't forget to continue to support your children in their early adult years. Okay? All right. Let's see. We got a little bit more time. So brain size. This is another interesting area. Does the size of your brain predict your intelligence?
No.
No? Yes?
No.
You're both correct. The answer is yes and no. Okay? Is brain size big? Is bigger always better? So we know that, for instance, a chicken has a brain the size of a pea. And if you have chickens, you know they are the world's stupidest creatures. The whole, like, there's stories like about turkeys that if it rains and a turkey looks up, it'll drown.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that happen, but granted, it doesn't rain very much in the desert. But if, you know, a turkey sees like 2 inches of water, it will, I don't know, somehow drown in it. I'm not really sure. I've had full-size turkeys drown in about like that much water. Like, you could have stood up and then they will die. They're the stupidest animals. You thought I was criticizing cows? Turkeys are even dumber than chickens. So if you notice, all the animals that we eat are really stupid. So it's, I don't know, it's a good
You're
thing.
saying they're made for us.
Yes, that's a good theory. And maybe also we have bred animals to be more dumb.
Are pigs stupid?
To make it easier, huh?
You know, yeah, to make it easier on us. Pigs are the least stupid animal on the farm, I think. But I have pigs, and no, they're not that intelligent. I mean,
They'll eat anything.
they'll eat anything. I'll have a pig butchered because, you know, we eat our animals that we raise. So I'll have a pig butchered, and we used to like separate the animal. And then there was one time when the butcher, I wasn't paying attention, I wasn't over there, and I usually supervise things when the butcher's there. And the butcher killed one of the pigs in the pen with the other pigs. And they came over, and the other pigs are drinking the pig's blood as it's dying. And I just thought, yeah, they're not really upset by this, are they?
It's
So,
a ritual for them.
There
Yeah.
was like a case where a criminal ended up killing somebody and he fed the body to the pigs and
Oh,
they
yeah.
ate everything.
Yeah, that's a known tactic for the mafia. I charge like $100 for people to come and dispose of their bodies. It's a good business though. You have to be careful though, because jewelry passes right through them. So you have to make sure you get rid of that. And sometimes they don't crunch up all the teeth. So, but yeah, I mean, we feed our pigs food scraps, and it's kind of scary. Like last Thanksgiving, we tossed the turkey carcass, like the whole bone, and they just crunch right through it, no problem. So yeah, pigs are scary. They're vicious. Yeah, my pigs. I have a breed that's really nice, but there's some pigs that are just really dangerous. Anyways, I've always wanted to teach history because if you look at like the history of Western civilization, it was dramatically decided in multiple cases by pig attacks. So history was changed because a certain king or somebody was attacked and killed on a pig hunt. So yeah, it's interesting. All right, so is bigger always better? It depends on the motion. I mean, it depends on the size of the brain. So size of the crucial areas in the brain, not the entire brain itself. Which has been one argument in history about saying certain people are more superior than others. White people tend to have bigger brains than black people, on average. Men have bigger brains than women, on average. But we know that if you account for all of the variation in income and so on, that there is no intellectual difference between men and women, blacks and whites, and so on. So it just... we know that the brain grows to fill the cavity that it's in. So whatever the size of the skull, the brain will get that big. So it's not that your intelligence is determining how big your brain is, or that the brain size is determining the intelligence. It's simply it fills up whatever size it's in. Now, if you have a smaller skull, the brain just becomes more compact. And that is why the intelligence doesn't change just because you have a bigger brain. If you look at a blue whale brain, blue whales' brains are the size of a Volkswagen bug. Okay, so like there to there, this huge brain. But if you look at the density of the neurons and their connections, is not very dense. So to say somebody's brain is dense is actually a compliment. You kind of have it reversed. You're so dense. Well, thank you. Blue whales are smart, but they are not as smart as humans. Okay, not that humans are always using their intelligence for the best purposes, but we're still smarter than a whale or a dolphin. The other factor that we know affects intelligence is if you look at the brain, okay, so you have basically the brain, okay, it's not the best drawn, but you have the brain and you have the internal white matter, and then you have the cortex, which is gray. So there's two different colors in your brain. And the more gray matter to white, the ratio between gray to white, the smarter the animal is. So a blue whale has not as much gray to white as we do, but it has a big ratio of a lot of gray to white. Whereas a chicken, their brain is like that much gray, and the rest is white. Very little gray matter. So that gray matter in the brain is what gives us our intellectual capacity. Lizards don't even have gray matter in the brain. So there's not much thinking going on in the lizard. They're mostly just reacting, almost like robotic sort of things. They're not emotional thinking creatures. There's no lizard philosophy out there secretly or anything like that.
What about the Geico?
Well, I mean, obviously Australian chameleons are different, or whatever it was, not chameleon, Australian gecko, right? Gecko. So that's the one exception to the lizard rule. All right, and then we have, see, we already talked about that. We have certain areas, so like the music part of the brain, right? If that is bigger than average, you'll have more musical ability. So the entire brain may not be larger than average, but certain sections of the brain may be larger than average, and that is associated with intelligence. Also, it's not the dimensions of the brain, but the weight of the brain is associated with higher intelligence. And that's because there's more neurons connected than somebody else's brain. And so it becomes a denser, heavier brain. So it may not get larger because you only have whatever room you're born with in your skull, but it will become a thicker, heavier brain. Okay? So there is a correlation between the size of your brain and intelligence, but it's a small correlation, and it's not the overall size of the brain, it's the specific areas as well as the weight, the overall weight of the brain. Okay? Einstein had a pretty heavy brain. And we know that because there was a university professor who, when Einstein died, snuck into the mortuary and stole his brain. And he kept it under his desk for years and years and years. And it's only recently, like in the 10 years ago or something, that he died and left Einstein's brain, I think, to the Smithsonian, something like that. Which, of course, it was not kept in the best condition possible. And so now there's no scientific value to his brain. It's just a curiosity in a museum now, which is kind of sad.
So in other words, that dude committed a crime.
Oh yes, he committed a crime. That's why he didn't admit to it until he died. Yeah. So again, correlation is not causation. So this is the other thing we have to remember. So let's say the music part of your brain is really developed. It's larger than normal. It's chicken or the egg thing. Did that cause your musical intelligence, or was it your interest in music and your lessons and your years of practice that caused that development? And it could be both. So Mozart, guaranteed he would have been born with the music part of his brain much better developed. You can tell because he was, as a child, they called him the Wunderkind, the wonder child. And he traveled Europe giving, performances to all the kings and queens of Europe. So no doubt that he was born with a more developed area of his brain. However, environmental stimulation would have developed it even more. So again, correlation is not causation. Now, one other thing that we look at is how fast do you think? What is the speed of your processing? And is your intelligence connected with that? And again, this is sort of a yes and no sort of thing. There are mixed results. Some studies say yes, some studies say no. So probably speed of processing is involved in some intellectual functions and not involved in others. That's probably why we're getting mixed results with this. So it's part of the story, but not the whole thing. One study they did was they would flash this picture with two lines of different sizes really quick and ask the person which one was longer. And people with high IQs were able to get this right more often than people with low IQs. Okay? So their brain was able to grab the information and store it in their memory faster than people with lower IQs. That does not necessarily mean people with higher IQs are thinking faster. It could be that people with higher IQs have more efficient memory stores. So it may not exactly be intelligence itself that's causing that. Obviously, if you can remember things faster, then you will be a more intelligent person. So it's complicated. This is one of the studies that showed a negative result. So they I would not volunteer for this. Probably college students who need extra credit. I'm going to put 2 probes into your brain to measure how fast electricity goes from one neuron to another neuron. So I'll shock your brain here, and then I'll measure when that electric wave gets to this next spot. And they found that there was no association, or very little relationship to intelligence in this. People with high IQs, sometimes it moves slightly faster, but it was such a weak correlation, you couldn't say that people with high IQ are actually thinking faster than people with low IQ. What studies do show is that people with high IQ seem to have more, better organized brains. So when the connections between the neurons are made, they're efficient. They're not like all over the place and messy, but they make sense and they're straight. They're not like, sort of all over the place. And so it's easier to pull those thoughts out because the brain is so well organized. Which is why, for instance, your textbook has chapters and headings and subheadings and tries to organize things into concepts so that your brain organizes it better and it's easier to understand it. So when you study, you should try to understand what is the point of what I'm learning before you go through and learn the information, because your brain will organize it better. All right, genetics. Is intelligence genetic? Is it environmental? The best way we can learn this is through adoption studies, which are sort of sad, but it's life. Sometimes twins get adopted into different households. They have identical genetics, so if in different environments they have things in common, we know that it is most likely caused by genetics. And if with identical genetics they have things that are not in common, then that's probably an environmental thing. So some of the studies we found, correlation of IQs for identical twins raised in different homes is higher of a correlation than siblings raised in the same home. So is that genetics or environment?
Genetics.
It's genetics, okay? So even though these identical twins are raised in separate homes, they still have more similar of an IQ than non-twin siblings raised in the same home. That means genetics are more powerful than environment when it comes to intelligence, at least according to this one study. Another study found that when a child is adopted out, their IQ is more similar to their biological mother's IQ than their adopted mother's IQ.
Environment.
That's genetics. More similar to their bio mom than adopted mom. Yeah, so again, that's genetics. So some studies have found environment's a little bit more powerful. Some studies have found genetics are a little bit more powerful. So overall, we say it's roughly 50-50. So genetics is about 50% of your intelligence. Environment is about 50%. So make sure you marry a smart person. If you're in love with a dumb person, go get a sperm donor who's smart. Just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding. Okay. So there's strong evidence that there is a link between genes and IQ. Okay. We do know, I've sort of talked a little bit about this, parental involvement with the kids, opportunities for stimulation, having a boring home without any toys or anything for the kids to do will lower IQ. So there is that environmental impact. Poverty, abuse, trauma, things like that will lower the IQ. So environment is important. I'm sort of trying to go through this a little faster now, so take typical notes, or fast notes. So, see, this was one study that said environment was about 57%. One of the causes, one of the effects of the environment is a microenvironment. So a microenvironment is the immediate environment that is unique to each individual. So even though you grew up in the same home with your sister, you may choose different things. She may choose to go hang out with the skaters and get into trouble, and you may join the chess club. So we choose, even in a very similar environment, we have different experiences. You might be walking together and you trip in front of a bunch of people and get laughed at. That could have an impact on your view of the world. You could become a self-conscious person. Okay. And your sibling didn't experience that, so their environment is different. Okay. So nobody ever has truly the same environment. And then the older we get, the more capable we are of selecting our own environment. You can only blame your parents for your issues for so long before it's now your own fault that you still have them. Okay. And then we have the connection between genes and environment. So there's something called a reaction range. So one of the questions I always ask is, if you were adopting a kid and the adoption agency said, these kids' parents kind of dumb, would you adopt that kid?
If they're cute.
If they're cute, okay, yeah, you're right. Best answer I've ever gotten.
I
Would you? Do you believe that you could make that kid smart? Yeah. So you are a nurture person rather than nature, at least when it comes to intelligence.
I think maybe you could find a balance.
You can find a balance?
Yeah,
Okay.
I would try to find a balance.
Yeah.
Give
Cool.
them the tools to succeed.
Uh-huh. You like them anyways, even if they're dumb, you're okay with it, yeah. So what reaction range tells us, what research tells us, is there is a certain range that our genes can interact with the environment. So you have a genetic limit to your IQ. The environment determines if you reach that genetic limit. But no matter how good your environment is, you can't get above that genetic limit. That's what the research shows at this point. I don't know, it might change in the future. But let's say you adopt your kid and their genes say they can have an IQ of 120, which is pretty good, right? I wouldn't turn that down. It's a pretty good IQ. And then they're raised in the backwoods of Alabama, right? And they're not educated well. They may only reach 90. So even though their genetics say they're above average, they actually end up below average because they weren't educated well. You could have a kid with a genetic potential of, let's say, 100, and they're raised in Beverly Hills, and they have every resource in the world, and they reach the top of their genetic capability. So they actually seem smarter than this kid with an IQ of 90, but genetically, this kid is actually intellectually the superior.
Capacity is.
Because the capacity is better, but environmentally they were limited. They didn't reach the capacity. This is the weakness of the eugenics movement. Because they said, oh, all of these people who don't have a high IQ, we should just get rid of their genetics. They have bad genetics. Well, you don't know if somebody has bad genetics until you put them in an environment that allows them to reach the top of their capacity. And the problem, of course, is that you have all these people who are poor, living in poverty, who aren't educated well, and of course they're going to have lower IQs because their environment's so bad. But you really have no idea how smart they are. So that
they get the tools that they need to succeed, they will.
they will succeed to the limit of their genetic capacity. Yeah. Which could be Einstein level, or it could be, it could be an IQ of 60. That could be, if you have a kid with Down syndrome, their IQ is limited tremendously. Maybe 50 is the smartest they can be. Now, if you raise them right, you give them all those resources, they could be a fairly well-functioning person at 50. Actually, 50 is pretty low, but let's say 60. Because most people with Down syndrome do pretty well in life. So they're mildly mentally retarded, but they could do pretty well in life. I mean, there's people with Down syndrome who are actors, and even there's one that is doing professional modeling. So they can have careers and family and
One
everything.
man a slaughterhouse. One man a slaughterhouse.
Yes. Well, that's autism, not Down syndrome.
Oh,
But yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. So this is what we call the reaction range. Your genetic capacity reacting to the environment. So you could be Einstein, but if Einstein was raised in a bad environment, which fortunately he wasn't, he could have been perfectly average. That's the importance of resources. So when you're poor, your genetics are much less important because the environment is what's limiting your intellectual growth. If you are in an affluent environment, then your genetics limit your capability because you will most likely get to the top of your capacity. So the only thing limiting you is your genetics, which could be why historically people who are well off were much more concerned about lineage, who you marry, your genetics, your breeding, and so on. Poor people have never really cared about breeding. Like, they're not tracking their lineage and worrying about that because genetics isn't playing a role in their life. But if you're affluent, genetics is playing a role. Interesting. Okay? So, like I said, genetics and environment is important. Now, one of the other reasons that we know that, genetics is a piece of the story, but we don't see differences between the races with genetics. Okay, it's sort of interesting. So racial differences there is a difference in the IQ, like I said, but that's only because of environmental factors like disparities in wealth or resources. Some of the things we've seen, there was an interesting study that was done with adopted African Americans as well as, well, I'll get to the World War I next. But if you look at black kids who are adopted into white families, there's no disparity in IQ, which again suggests that it is an environmental difference that is lowering the average IQ for African Americans. Okay. If you were raised in the same environment that a white kid's raised in, there's going to be no difference in intelligence, on average. You, by yourself, may be particularly not as smart as the average person, but on average, there won't be that difference. Another really genius study that was done was on half black children in Germany versus half black children here in America. So back in World War II, I don't know what it was, but a lot of black soldiers went over to Germany, and those Frauleins really liked black guys, and there's a lot of half black babies from World War II in Germany. They just had a thing for each other, I don't know. And so this really smart researcher said, let's look at IQ between these half American, African American, half German, white people, and then the same mix here in America. And there was a dramatic difference between half black kids here in America and in Germany. And for some reason, I don't know, Germany has an issue with Jews, but black people, totally cool. I don't know, it's a weird country. So there's very little racism against blacks in Germany. And so the theory is that it's the discrimination and also the lack of resources, because Germany is a very wealthy country. There's not as much disparity in wealth as there is here in America. And so they're getting the resources they need to succeed, and it's the resources, not the race, that is the issue. Okay? Does that make sense? Yeah. All right, cool. We talked about microenvironment, blah, blah, blah. Talked about poverty. Now, here are some environmental risk factors for IQ, so this is interesting. The number one risk factor is being a member of a minority group. Okay? And again, it's not the race itself that's the issue, it's the other environmental things that come along with that. Yeah, the opportunities and so on. The head of the household is unemployed or a low-skilled worker. Interesting, huh? We never think of that as a risk factor, but it is. The mother did not complete high school. Okay? Not father, but mother. Family has 4 or more children. So a big family means less interaction with each kid, so lower intellectual stimulation.
So the ones on the right are the potential IQ for the kids who weren't affected even though they had this risk factor?
Yes.
Okay.
No, this is, they didn't have the risk factor. So if you look at, so 110 would be the average IQ for non-minorities.
Oh, okay.
108 would be the average IQ for somebody who the head of household is employed or is a high-skilled worker. Does that make sense?
In a family of 4 or more children, also, you have to spread out your financial resources
Yes,
among
yeah.
them too.
And the other thing is that the people who usually have more children are often minorities as well, and then often part of lower income groups. So that it may not necessarily be having lots of children that's the issues, but again, the stuff associated with it. So it's not being a minority that's the issue, but the things associated with it. So it could be the same thing with having a large family. Let's see, father is absent from family, really bad for your kids. Some research even suggests that it's worse for dad to be gone than for mom to be gone, which is interesting. Because we often say dads aren't quite as necessary as moms, but it's not true. Family experience many stressful life events. Parents have rigid child-rearing values. Mother is highly anxious or distressed, very bad for your kids. Mother has poor mental health or a diagnosed disorder, and mother shows little positive affect towards child. So mothers are important. Dads are also important, but moms are super important. Okay, so it's interesting, right? A lot of these things you wouldn't think that would lower your kid's IQ, but it actually is strongly associated with that.
It's actually kind of said that with a mother who has poor health, it's closer to average than all the other ones.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you're better off having a mother with schizophrenia than a mother who is anxious. Isn't that weird? Yeah.
Or shows little positive effect.
Right. I mean, that's the biggest drop right there in IQ, is mother showing little positive affect. It's very important. The interesting thing is dad just has to be there for the kid to have a benefit. That doesn't actually have to do anything. It's just like he just need to be around and we're good. Yeah.
I'm here, how's your IQ?
Oops, there. So I mean, obviously, dad interacting positively is beneficial, but yeah, it's not as beneficial as mom interacting positively. So let's see. So this is what we call the Flynn effect. So one interesting thing that is happening is every decade, the average IQ in our country increases by 3 points. Why do you think this is? Are people getting smarter? When you watch TV, and sometimes it's hard to believe that people could be getting smarter, but are we getting smarter?
I think technology is just more readily available.
Okay, so does that make us smarter in a way?
In a way.
I mean, we have like the world's information at our fingertips, right? I mean, we can learn anything at any moment.
And you're Dr. Google.
I'm Dr. Google. Yeah. Yep. If I want to know what the side effects of pesticide poisoning on dogs are, 5 seconds and you have it. Okay. So we are learning things a lot more. Like when I was a kid, you had to, if you wanted to learn something, you had to write it down and you had to remember the next time you were at the library to look it up. Right? Or you hoped you had an Encyclopedia Britannica set.
Do you think it's because more people have an opportunity to learn?
It could be also, okay? We have much more education. My grandfather went up through 3rd grade. That was all his education was. So he was too poor, he had to go work.
I don't know, every 10 years kind of seems like it's a bit slow paced.
10 years, a bit slow paced, okay? So it can't just be education. Probably from the 60s on, you know, everybody has gone to school. It's not like in the 30s when my grandfather was a kid. So what else could be affecting it? It's probably part of it.
The
Push for
social
education.
environment's changing.
Push for education.
The social environment's changing, like a new wave is coming in. Like there was the 60s, the 70s, and then now we're
But
in
what is making each of those new waves more intelligent?
Yeah, I guess I would say the advancement of technology.
Okay, so advancement of technology is probably a major factor. Okay.
The economy?
The economy, we're wealthier, we're more affluent, so there's more resources. Okay.
Or the need to have education so you can go out and get a better position in life.
Okay, so we have a push for education. Although America has always been pro-education. I mean, even when we were back in the colony period, if you read books back then, that's one of the fundamental American values is
So you could
education.
read the Bible.
Yes. Yep. If nothing else, yeah, you better be able to read that.
What about the daily challenges? Like just the simple fact of, I work at the hospital now, and I'm hearing talk that a lot of the nurses are now required to have bachelor's degrees.
Yeah.
You know, so nowadays it's not, you can get a high school diploma and have a functioning career. No, you have to have a college degree to be functional, so you have to.
Upping the requirements.
Yep.
Yeah, you're forced to learn.
Well, and just think about like a cell phone, right? Learning how to use a cell phone. 100 years ago, 20 years ago, you didn't have to worry about that. So everything in life, like you're learning, like, okay, I want coffee, but now I don't just go to a coffee shop and get coffee. Now I have an app where I can learn how to do it in advance and, you know, pay a tip afterwards through my cell phone. So everything is a bit more challenging. We have a lot more to learn versus, 100 years ago, 90% of Americans were living on a farm. 90% of the country were farmers. So, and farming is of course challenging, there's a lot to learn, but it's not like life is now where there's these constant, like, new things you have to learn.
I think they do it that way so people want to get up and do something instead of just being comfortable.
Who do you mean by they?
Like how he works in the hospital and says the RNs in their hospital has a bachelor's.
Uh-huh.
But if they didn't push that, then how many people will get their bachelor's?
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah. I don't think anybody's doing that for our benefit. Government probably likes it if we're complacent and just do what we're told. But yeah, like a hospital, I mean, obviously you have better quality workers. And then there's so many people going into nursing right now that they can require that. They used to allow just like an associates or whatever because they needed nurses. But now nurses are kind of a dime a dozen, so they can be really picky. Okay, so here are some of the explanations, and you guys did hit on them. Daily life is more challenging. We've got a lot of things to learn. We're constantly getting new information. Another one is nutrition is better. Few of you are starving to death. We have all the food we need. We have too much food. Okay. Now, if this is the case, we may begin to see a decline in IQ because food has lost a lot of its nutritional content. So, I mean, you eat a salad today versus a salad, in 1900, and you're getting 40-50% less nutrition in that same salad than what we would have gotten, 50 years ago, which is crazy.
It was all
So,
natural back in the day.
what was that?
It was all natural back in the
It's
day.
all natural back in the day. Yeah, now we have toxins, pesticides, and all sorts of crap that could be affecting our food.
It's to grow your own things.
Yep. Yep. And then one of the things is we teach through the test. So it may be that we are being taught how to take the IQ test better. And the reasoning ability that the IQ test asks for is how the school system works nowadays. So we teach people to think in a way that perhaps is making them better able to take the IQ test, and so they're scoring higher. So maybe it's not actually that their IQ is increasing, we're just getting better at taking the test. And then another really interesting theory is something called hybrid vigor. This is an agricultural term. So like I raise Highland cows. Do you guys know what those are? It's a Scottish breed of cow. I'm going to show you because they're cute.
Those are fluffy cows.
The fluffy cows, yeah.
Oh,
The fluffy ones. So these are my cows, okay? So I have these adorable little guys here. Okay, I love when I have babies. Mine aren't, see, they're supposed to be super friendly, but mine are jerks. So, yeah, so I'm going to barbecue mine and get new ones. You think I'm joking. So I have this kind of cow. Highland cows, they're endangered. I only raise endangered livestock. And the reason is because they take 2 to 2.5 years old to get big enough to be turned into hamburgers. Whereas a typical industrial cow like an Angus only takes 1.5 years. So you can make a lot more money off of them. But what you can do is you could breed a Highland cow with an Angus, and the offspring is going to be superior to both of the parents. And you can do that with any breeds. It's just like dogs. We all know that mutts are healthier than purebreds, right? So Hitler actually had it opposite. If he wanted to have a superior race, he should have been mixing a bunch of races together instead of trying to purify the race. And the reason is because if you look at genetics, so like you have, if you're a girl, you have XX chromosomes, and everybody has issues on their DNA. So like I carry the DNA for Lou Gehrig's disease. You may carry the DNA for breast cancer or something like that. You can do a genetic test, like 23andMe is what I did. I also carry the DNA for red hair, so I'm hoping if I ever have kids, I'll have redheads.
Do you go to your doctor for that, or is like?
No, you can buy it at Target, actually. Yeah, or buy it off of their website. You just spit in a tube, send it in, and they analyze your DNA. Yeah. So if you have an issue here, and you have the same issue on the second chromosome, you're guaranteed to get the problem. And that's the issue with purebreds, or with inbreeding especially. Inbreeding, your siblings especially is really bad because you're getting, every generation you inbreed, the problems on the chromosomes are increasing. And so now you have this mentally retarded, weird, inbred jet sort of kid. Okay. But if, let's say you're full of all sorts of DNA problems, and then you have kids with somebody who is really far unrelated from you, chances are, even if they have DNA problems, it probably won't be the same exact ones as you. And so even if you have the problems, as long as your kid has a second chromosome without the problems, your DNA, your body is smart enough to go and read the healthy DNA rather than the messed up DNA. And so now you have a perfectly healthy child. So that's what hybrid vigor is, where you mix these two different breeds or two different races, and you have a superior child, a healthier child, maybe a smarter child.
Is it true that doctors can now mess with DNA?
Oh yeah, genetic modification of half the food you're eating, well, probably more than half the food you're eating is genetically modified.
GMOs?
Yeah, GMOs. Yep. And can they do GMO humans? Yes, absolutely. It's not legal, but they can do it. We just had like 2 years ago, there was a baby that was born who had 3 parents.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So they put DNA from 2 other parents into an egg from the third parent. You can do that. What that does to the kid, we'll find out. Who knows?
And, you know,
No
it
idea.
just creates an earth that's hot, flat, and crowded. I mean, we won't have enough resources. If no one dies,
Possibly, yeah.
if no one has disease, if no one,
Yeah.
you know,
It's possible.
it's
Yeah.
kind of the natural order of things.
So
when
they're
we-
playing God.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we've always played God a little bit with like breeding, but that's sort of like a natural way of changing the genetics. You know, you breed, like if you want a cow that produces more beef, then you have a particularly muscly cow, then you make sure you breed all the girls to that cow. But that's much more natural than genetic modification. Like for instance, there are goats that you can milk spider web proteins from now. So you make spider protein with goats. Because spider webs are actually really strong. They're stronger than steel. But they're just so thin that you can easily break it. But if it was as thick as a steel cable, it would be stronger than steel. So now you can milk a goat and you can get spider web protein out of it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That just sounds like that would look disgusting.
Yeah. They have pigs that have cow hide instead of pig hide, because cow hide is more valuable than pig hide.
What's
So
the
they're breeding pig hide, is that, or cow hide on the pig?
They're
Is
breeding
that-
cow hide on a
Oh
pig.
my goodness.
Yeah.
what's high?
Skin. Cow skin.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So like your leather jacket or whatever. Yeah, leather belt.
Wow.
So now what the long-term ramifications of that is, who knows? Could be nothing, could be something huge. For instance, we have GMO salmon that have been genetically modified to be like 3 times the size of regular salmon, which there may be nothing wrong with that except for the fact that those GMO salmon have now escaped into the ocean. So now what happens to the ecosystem of the ocean now that we have salmon that are 3 times as big as other salmon?
The salmon start to
We'll
grow
find
larger.
out.
Oh my God, that made me scared of the beach for some reason. That made me
Well, there's a lot of reasons to be scared
The
of it. Not
resources
just
to get
salmon.
fish or.
There's,
I mean, let's just start with Jaws and then we'll go on from there.
Japanese fish was also genetically modified, and it started eating its own kind.
Right, yeah. Yeah, they eat other salmon and then they eat all sorts of other things and yeah, who knows what the side effects are.
Once you find out
So-
you're bigger than something, you just decide.
Science goes deep. Yeah, we shouldn't mess with things. I mean, didn't they watch Jurassic Park?
Yeah.
You mess with the world, it ends bad.
Right.
I think
Every
there's some
time.
people who are actually trying to figure out a way to recreate dinosaur DNA too.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, I admit it would be hard to resist that, but
That woolly mammoth that was found.
curiosity killed the cat, right?
Satisfaction, what about?
So we end up knocking
the
ourselves
cat
off the
doesn't have
food
more
chain.
than 8 lives.
We have glow-in-the-dark cats now.
Glow in the dark
Glow in
cats.
the dark cats, yeah. Jellyfish DNA. Yeah, let's see.
Can't be healthy for them cats.
Yeah, you can buy
I
them.
want glow in that dark.
Living it up in there.
So we don't trip over them or rub them over again.
What else?
Oh, no,
They
no,
are
no,
real.
No.
That it is real.
No.
This is not Photoshop. This is a real thing.
Is it a type of cat?
Are those lights on?
That's
No,
another
that's
cat.
the-
They're glow in the dark.
jellyfish.
They're phosphorescent, just like jellyfish. They have jellyfish
But when they
phosphorescent DNA.
have babies, can their babies be glow in the dark? Or
Yes.
they have-
So now you have a whole genetic line of cats. Now what happens with cats? You know, they get loose into the environment. They breed with other cats, and now cats all glow. Can they hunt and take care of themselves? I mean, there's all sorts of possible ramifications. So it's dangerous. So, not to mention, is it healthy? Like if you eat the food. So corn, for instance, GMO corn has been modified to produce pesticide. So, but don't worry, the government says it doesn't hurt humans. It only kills bugs that eat the corn. So you don't have to spray pesticide on it more, it just produces its own. But of course, research suggests that corn causes all sorts of damage to us, even though the government says don't worry about it. Because we can trust the government.
Yeah,
There's so much to learn.
So anyhow, go home, Google GMOs, learn about it, and
That's amazing.
I was going to put the exam up tonight, and you'll have until this weekend to do it, okay? So chapters 1, 2, and 9.
Does it glow out? I mean,
I think we go all.
Also, about the first quiz, it's still saying that mine's being in grading process.
Okay, I'll check it.
So what time, like Sunday night or?
Sunday at midnight.
Sunday at midnight.
Sunday at midnight for the exam.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Chapter 1 to 9.
1, 2, and 9. Yeah.
Just go on that bulletin board thing.
Yeah, assignment? Yes.
Do you have a list of like professors' names, like in school?
I have access to that on my email system, but it's the first name, period, and then the last name at bbc.edu.
The what?
The first name, a period, the last name.
Oh, I heard the period.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I guess.
I need the class base.
Okay, give me just a second and I'll look it up for you.